Are you inspired by reading stories of great Christians? I know I sure am. Years ago, I decided to read more nonfiction than fiction, and I've collected quite a good library of missionary stories. Since the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy, I think that's why we're encouraged when we read about what other people have gone through, how they've suffered and endured for the Lord, all the hardships and trials that they've faced. Encourage us in our everyday life and things that we go through, knowing that other people have gone through much worse and survived and conquered and overcome for the Lord. I want to talk about the autobiography of John G. Paton. I haven't met a whole lot of people who know the story of John Paton, and I find it very inspiring. He was a missionary to the New Hebrides Islands, which are over close to Australia and New Guinea in that area. He has an amazing story of how he grew up. His parents decided to dedicate their home to raising godly children. His dad really wanted to be a foreign missionary, but he wasn't able. And so he dedicated his oldest son. He didn't tell him for many, many years, but he dedicated his oldest son to the work of the Lord. And when he organized his house, he had one end, a small end for living quarters, and the other end for his workshop where he made stockings. And that was his business. And in between was a little room that was a prayer room. So in a crowded house, he dedicated quite a bit of real estate there for a prayer room. And he would go there 3 times a day. John Paton's dad would go in there and pray. And he also said that before he spanked any of his kids, he would go in there and pray for them. And John said that did more for them, more good for them than the actual spanking, knowing that God was being talked to about what they had done. Sundays were a fun day for them. They went to church. His mom was unable to go to church. I think she had trouble walking or something like that. And so they would come home and recite the sermon back to her. They would get accolades for remembering exactly what had happened at church and telling it to their mom. And so that was kind of neat. It wasn't a dull, boring day. They had a lot of people over and they would discuss spiritual things, and they really had good times learning doctrine and going over the catechism and things like that. When John got older, he went off to find work and eventually became a school teacher, and he continued going to school. And then there were, this has always impressed me, there were a couple churches that got together and pinpointed a part of town that didn't have much spiritual influence. And they hired John and another young man to go and share the gospel there. And I just think that's really neat that they would figure out which place didn't have a church or any spiritual influence. And so John got hired to go to the bad part of town and try to start some Bible studies. He was supposed to work for 4 hours a day, although he ended up doing much more than that, but he could go to school at the same time. He was studying medicine. And so he worked at it. After about a year, he had not had very much success. And the leaders said, the people who hired him said, well, we're going to send you to another part of town. He said, just give me a few more months. So we went back to the people, and a few of them were coming for Bible study, and they liked John. And he said, we really got to do better. And so they kind of buckled down and worked harder and got more people to come. And eventually a real great work started there among the poor people. And he saw a lot of them converted. And it was really amazing what God was doing there. Here's one testimony he gives. Page 43. One infidel lecturer in the district became very ill. His wife called me in to visit him. I found him possessed of a circulating library of infidel books, by which he sought to pervert unwary minds. Though he had walked, talked, and lectured much against the gospel, he did not at all really understand its message. He had read the Bible, but only to find food there for ridicule. Now, supposed to be dying, he confessed that his mind was full of terror as to the future. After several visits and frequent conversations and prayers, he became genuinely and deeply interested, drank in God's message of salvation, and cried aloud with many tears for pardon and peace. He bitterly lamented the evil he had done, and called in all the infidel literature he had in circulation with the purpose of destroying it. He began to speak solemnly to any of his old companions that came to see him, telling them what he had found in the Lord Jesus. At his request, I bought and brought to him a Bible, which he received with joy, saying, "This is the book for me now," and adding, "Since you were here last, I gathered together all my infidel books. My wife locked the door till she and my daughter tore them to pieces, and I struck the light that reduced the pile to ashes." As long as he lived, this man was unwearied and unflinching in testifying to all that crossed his path how much Jesus Christ had been to his heart and soul, and he died in the possession of a full and blessed hope. So it's really neat to see a conversion like that and how he shared the gospel with him, and the guy saw what he had done wrong and he wanted to change. John went through some persecution there from Catholics, but overall his work grew a lot. But he felt God's call to be a foreign missionary, so he applied. There was a place in the New Hebrides, and no one was really wanting to go there, and so he offered himself for the work. Only his parents and one other friend agreed that it was a good idea, because everyone else saw how successful he had been. They thought he ought to stay where he was, but he knew God was calling him to do something different. And so he did go over to the New Hebrides Islands, and he lived among the cannibals there, and it's really quite horrific, all that he suffered and all his adventures and how many times he was almost killed. It's amazing he survived. And he lost family members, and I don't want to spoil the whole story because I want you to read it. But here's something that just describes how bad it was there. And turn this page here. Let me see. Here's from page 97. Leaving all consequences to the disposal of my Lord, I determined to make an unflinching stand against wife-beating and widow-strangling. Feeling confident that even their natural conscience would be on my side, I accordingly pled with all who were in power to unite and put down these shocking and disgraceful customs. At length 10 chiefs entered into an agreement not to allow any more beating of wives or strangling of widows, and to forbid all common labor on the Lord's day. But alas, except for purposes of war or other wickedness, the influence of the chiefs on Tanna was comparatively small. One chief boldly declared, "If we did not beat our wives, they would never work. They would not fear and obey us, but when we have beaten, killed, and feasted on 2 or 3, the rest are all very quiet and good for a long time to come." I tried to show him how cruel it was, besides that it made them unable for work, and that kindness would have a much better effect. So, it's amazing the degradation of the people there, and they would eat each other, and it was really bad. But gradually he was able to make headway, and hopefully you read the story. It's neat to see that they didn't tell these people to accept Christ and then they would start to change, but they told them right away, you need to change. They appealed to their conscience, and they believed that the conscience would testify the same things that they were saying, that they needed to stop their evil ways. So, hope you read this book. Hope you're inspired. John Paton, what an amazing person.